All right, for this week's Formation Station, there's actually a few interesting things to talk about regarding how Arsenal have been playing. So for one thing, I was noticing, because I had the advantage being on vacation this week, I watched the Chelsea match live as it happened. I caught some of the pregame coverage beforehand, and they were doing what they do pregame, talking about what the lineups are, what that means. And I noticed them showing a 4-2-3-1 configuration for Arsenal, where you'd have basically the interesting thing is to note who the two are, right? Because we know all the rest of the midfielders are going to be in the three. We know Gyökeres or Jesus, depending on the situation, is going to be the one up top, but the two would be Rice and Zubimendi. That's interesting to me because, we've talked before about how we incorporate having a striker, a real like number 9 on the pitch, whether that is Jesus or Gyökeres. So how is the rest of the midfield all reflecting that?
So, there's an argument to be made that the way we talk about formations is really only how we talk about how they would stand if in the static moment right when the game kicks off. Because as we've seen, so much of this changes constantly throughout the course of the game. In a sense, I still think it's interesting. How do you describe what it is? What's the formation doing? Is it about where people stand or about where people are moving? Because if it's where we stand, it really is the 4-3-3, 4 in the back. We've got our 3 midfielders, the 2 defensive midfielders, and then an attacking midfielder. Typically Odegaard. We've seen Eze. We've seen Havertz do that recently as he's come back from injury. And then you have your top with our striker. Typically it's been Gyökeres or Jesus, with the wingers, Saka, Madueke on the right, and Trossard, Martinelli on the left. But we've seen also, as soon as the game kicks off, Arsenal is always pushing players forward. But we've talked about this for years. This was sort of, Pep's City style of 5 attackers. It was the 3 up front and then 2 of the midfielders making runs. And they've modified that over the years. Now we do a lot more with the fullbacks overlapping. Ben White started at Timber. Now we see Calafiori bombing into the box. So I guess what they're saying here is part of what they're looking at is the 2, Rice and Zubimendi, are both being used as defensive shields, right? They're sort of the deep players. They're there sometimes even you see one of them dropping back between the center backs and receiving the ball and starting to push forward from the center, from the defensive line. But usually you only see one of them do it, and the other one is usually pushed forward. Odegaard tends to drift more to the right. The wingers, I don't know if I buy that as a 3, but I guess you could argue it because we keep the wingers out wide, so they really forward players. But you sort of see here, it is an interesting question. What is the formation trying to describe? Yeah. And so I don't think either of those things that we've talked about, the 4-3-3 or the 4-2-3-1, I don't think either of them's wrong. But we've also seen how it's kind of inadequate to simply plug them into these positions, because it isn't like the board game where they're on the sticks and they don't move anywhere.
Right. Foosball.
We see how these players interchange with each other all over the field.
Right. No, that's a good point. I guess what I tend to notice is it's also kind of the shape that they fall back to. Like during transitional moments, when we're in possession, they kind of revert to it. And obviously it's fluid and flexible and they don't stick to it rigidly, but that's how they kind of spread out over the pitch and try and make sure that they get to different zones where they might find space. Oh, one minor note on space. I noticed during the Sunderland match today, I heard one of the commentators said something about passing the ball into room instead of into space. That's that's a synonym I haven't heard used in that context before. But yeah, so that's a good explanation. That makes sense how we're using Rice and Zubimendi. That's a useful thing to pay attention to. Next up in Formation Station, we've seen Martinelli come on in place of Madueke a couple times recently. That's a different choice.
It is and it isn't. I think it's fair to say that Trossard is a guy we don't want to take off at various points. We know Martinelli can play the right side. I think Madueke is going to be playing a lot more there with Saka being out for a little bit. So I think that was an interesting one to me in terms of how it kept Trossard on the field and also kind of took Madueke off. Well, I wouldn't say he had a bad game today, but he was a little less. He's had better ones, I think it's fair to say. And then I think the interesting one is sort of using Kai Havertz as in the Odegaard role, right? That we talked about Havertz coming back and how he should be the striker and replacing Jesus or Gyökeres and should be the three of them in some kind of competition. But remember, Havertz is actually a midfielder.
Right.
And so we're sort of using him in that almost creative midfield role. And he's not creative in the way Odegaard's creative. He's much more direct. But I think the sense was, and we've seen bits and pieces of it where maybe he links up a little better with, maybe he links up better with Gyökeres, and maybe he's able to unlock something from him in a way Odegaard maybe has struggled to.
Right.
I know it also could just be Arteta going, how do I get the players I want all on the field while still covering for injuries? There's a lot of questions that go into those kind of lineup decisions.
Yeah, it makes sense.